Making headlines for this week of December the 5th. Swedish power play. Collapse of government due to Israeli revenge, or an elaborate reverse psychology strategy from within the country. Israel on the line. Prime Minister fires key ministers and calls an election in the wake of dissension within the government. A golden trap. Vladimir Putin's strategy that has the Western banking cabal slowly, if not quickly, collapsing and devouring itself. And graphene and hemp, two more promising new technologies for fuel cell development in the future.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. Some very interesting geopolitical developments appear to be unfolding this week, and the noose also appears to be tightening around the necks of those aligned to the Zionist agenda and also to the global banking cabal. This week, Sweden witnessed what is arguably a historical collapse of a recently elected government. Some Swedish people with whom I spoke could not recall a time when a new government had collapsed so quickly. The question then becomes, why? As I am coming to learn, there are some very complicated aspects to Swedish nature and psychology. Obviously, I will not fully understand it as I am not Swedish. I may not get it wholly correct either, so I remind people not to believe or accept anything I report or share as truth unless there are aspects that resonate with you personally as feeling true for you in this moment. A few key facts about the current and former prime ministers first. Both are members of the formerly secretive Bilderberg Group, Fredrik Reinfeldt and Stefan Löfven. Löfven attended last year, and it could be argued that he was positioned to win this year, or at least be an acceptable backup if Reinfeldt lost, which he did. A member of Reinfeldt's government, prominent politician Carl Bildt, is himself a longtime Bilderberg member and closely aligned to the agenda of the Bilderberg Group. It has been speculated that Bildt received a castle in Italy shortly after the NATO campaign in Yugoslavia, allegedly for Sweden's support in that war. What is perhaps puzzling is that when it was announced that the government budget was going to be defeated, Carl Bildt sent a tweet from his Twitter account, basically saying that the failure of the government budget is better for the country. It seems that this tweet has now been retracted and replaced with a comment about the Prime Minister burning bridges with other political parties. It is perhaps unclear why Bildt would have supported the collapse of a budget proposed by a fellow Bilderberg member. Bildt himself is a supporter of the NATO global banking war agenda. A tweet of his on December 3rd, again from his Twitter account, reads, "Terrorism in Russia, street battle in Grozny. Moscow should have more pressing priorities than destabilizing Ukraine." A Swedish-based English news webpage, The Local, covered the unfolding events. In one article posted on December 3rd, the website writes, "Speaking at a press conference on Wednesday afternoon, Social Democrat Prime Minister Stefan Löfven said that Swedes would be asked to vote again on March 22nd next year. The last general election was held in September. The government will campaign to seek re-election together with the Greens and on the basis of the budget that just got defeated," he told reporters. Löfven was pushing for increased spending on welfare and jobs and pledged to maintain Sweden's liberal immigration laws. But his budget failed to get enough support because the nationalist Sweden Democrats, who hold the balance of power in Parliament, chose to support a rival budget from Sweden's center-right opposition parties. The government's budget got 153 votes, whereas 182 politicians were in favor of the opposition's budget, triggering a political crisis in the country. The website posted a tweet of a local, James Savage, who summed up the events this way: "Swedish politics is 100% game theory right now. Nobody quite sure where we're heading. Old rules no longer apply. He and the media may not even fully understand just how accurate that statement is. A separate article appearing in The Local reports political scientist Jenny Mattistam as saying that she agrees with the analysis of a former Social Democrat Prime Minister, Ingvar Carlsson, that Sweden looks ready for a move away from the two blocs that have dominated the political scene for the last 10 years. Like others, she sees the current impasse as being unprecedented in Swedish politics. According to Mattistam, we see now that the Sweden Democrats are in this kingmaker position and no one wants anything to do with them. They are quite big in Parliament and have now announced that they want to make noise and try to cause destruction. Then you really need to make sure you have a government that is strong enough to pass a budget and make other kinds of reforms. With this in mind, perhaps the only possibility is to have this extra election. The Sweden Democrats are being accused of being racist, but there are those who also say that the party is merely trying to protect the Swedish taxpayer from having to shoulder an excessive responsibility beyond the means of taxpayers and the country in general. What may have just happened in Sweden? I offer that there may be at least two possibilities to consider. Let's look at these two scenarios. One, Löfven, the current Prime Minister, may have gone rogue against the Bilderberg Group. And this stems from his announcement on the day that the party was elected that Sweden would vote against Israel and recognize Palestine as its own state. Assuming that there was truth to this, here's what could have happened today in the Swedish government, and Carl Bildt himself validated it with the tweet that it was better for the government budget to be defeated. There were external global forces in play that may have been seeking to strike back at Löfven for not towing the line of the global cabal agenda. This is one possibility. A second possibility. Maybe Löfven did not go rogue at all, and in fact is participating in a very elaborate reverse psychology strategy that was designed from the very beginning to consolidate the right while isolating the moderates. Perhaps the strategy all along was to portray Sweden as moving forward in the eyes of the world and then have it collapse into a right-wing polarization based on a war agenda through racism to profit the global cabal that is losing money because of the increasing global refusal to trade using the US dollar. No singular event, such as what happened in Sweden, can be analyzed only by itself. This is where it becomes so important to be able to see the larger picture related to the fiat currency system of global international banking, the system of commercial admiralty law, and the false flag events that are being attempted worldwide on racial grounds. For many, this issue of immigration may or may not seem like a particularly significant issue. That is, until one begins to look at other events that are unfolding around the world. I have commented on this in recent weeks. Over the past year or so, Sweden has been taking in very large numbers of immigrants and refugees from countries such as Syria, for example. There have been some questions, perhaps some speculation, and maybe even a few accusations that politicians are receiving kickbacks or rewards in some form for bringing more and more immigrants and or refugees into the country. Here is where it gets very hard and difficult, and it may be understandable as to why the Swedish people feel confused and perhaps even angry. There is also the challenge related to the general psychology of the Swedish people. The nature of the people is not to rise up outwardly against poor decisions made by leaders. They are a culture of rule followers, even if they may not always agree with the rules. A Swedish friend has said to me that this psychology, for the most part, stems back to the 1930s. Freedom from the feudal slavery system had come to Sweden toward the end of the 1800s. Women had just recently gained the right to vote in 1921, and by the 1930s, a more global economic agenda was beginning to filter into the society. It is also worth noting that at this time it was around the same period as when the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers were beginning to consolidate their global financial plan. There was a general strike in Sweden in 1930-31 with the primary goal to prevent wage cuts. 5 strikers were shot at and killed by police officers, and 5 were injured. This event apparently sits strongly within Swedish memory and the Swedish psychology, and it is said that this is the main reason, or perhaps one of the reasons, why Swedes will be friendly and obedient to authority in public while talking badly about them behind closed doors. They accept that if a rule has been made, there is very little point in questioning it, and therefore it must be followed. The Swedes exercise their opinions during elections, but Swedes do not seem to question the fact that many governments and national politics are heavily influenced and perhaps even controlled to varying degrees by outside interests. This is not being questioned in Sweden, and perhaps it should be. Swedish politicians, like others around the world, appear to be abusing their privilege by creating rules that they never told the general population about when they were campaigning. Once elected, they began to pass and implement legislation under the presumed consent of having won the election, but without having presented the legislation to the electorate for due consideration. Under the disguise of commercial law, their rules are given the force of law without democratic consent. Should a country accept refugees in times of true general humanitarian crisis? Absolutely, and I think many would support this. Here is the problem, and most Swedes do not appear to know this, and most politicians who do know probably do not want the people to know this. The conflicts in most, if not all countries, are doctored conflicts. They are created for profit of a small group of people. They have been specifically created. Sweden has been a traditionally stable country politically and economically for an extremely long time. Although the issue has been slowly coming to a boil over the years, the issue of race and of economics in spending money the people don't have to absorb costs associated with assimilating people to Sweden, while politicians allegedly receive kickbacks for bringing more and more people into the country. A stable country is suddenly becoming more and more unstable, and, coincidentally, it just happens to be along the same racial lines that are now forming in the U.S., in Missouri, and down in Texas with Mexico and the Spanish-speaking people, and other Western countries, including Canada, as the global cabal tries to stir up sentiment for violent revolution and war. I would like to create that the people will be strong enough to not fall for this trap in Sweden and also around the world. Perhaps this can become the second opportunity for the Swedish people to do the right thing, such as what Iceland has done, and begin to expose the international banking cartels and the politicians who have been guarding a criminally fraudulent fiat currency banking system designed to keep people in debt and in fear. In other geopolitical news, it is interesting to note that while Sweden will be having a new election on March 22nd, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, has succumbed to pressures rising within Israel and called an election for that country 1 week earlier than Sweden, the 17th of March. The London Daily Mail reported on December the 3rd that Israel's ruling coalition has finally fallen apart, paving the way for an election in March, 2 years ahead of schedule. The country's MPs, members of parliament, yesterday overwhelmingly approved a motion to dissolve the parliament, or Knesset, after Prime Minister Netanyahu failed to iron out differences with coalition partners and called for a poll. Further votes are due next week that will officially disband the parliament. The government, which took office in early 2013, will be one of the shortest in the country's history. A second article in the Daily Mail the day before had reported that the coalition government has been divided over key issues in recent weeks. Time magazine, in its article covering the story, reported the following. Prime Minister Netanyahu fired two of his most prominent ministers on Tuesday evening and called for new elections, underscoring his interest in establishing a right-wing government more loyal to his agenda. The Time magazine article also explains some of the reasons for the coalition collapse, writing that over the past week, Israeli media had begun to predict that the bad blood inside Netanyahu's coalition government had reached toxic new levels, and that it has pushed the hawkish leader to opt for new elections. The most recent bone of contention was a plan on the part of Lapid and his Yesh Atid party to cancel a tax on apartment purchases for first-time homeowners as a way to alleviate the cost of living crisis that Lapid has pledged to solve. But Netanyahu decided to block that with little explanation, as well as a health care reform plan, which in turn led Lapid to threaten to bolt the coalition. In his speech, Netanyahu condemned Livni for daring to meet with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas when she had been told not to, highlighting their differences over the failure of the peace talks in April. The most severe division, however, was over the question of Israel's status, or not, as a Jewish nation. Together, Lapid and Livni were among the foremost opponents to the passage by Netanyahu's cabinet of an initial draft of a controversial bill declaring Israel a nation-state. Netanyahu says he is dedicated to passing some version of this legislation so as to cement Israel's status as a Jewish state by law, which he argues is necessary for the country's survival. Critics say this would create an undemocratic two-tier system, which makes Israeli Arabs and other non-Jewish minorities inferior citizens. The timing of the election seems to benefit Netanyahu in one way, as the leader faces continued and increasing international pressure to find a peaceful solution with Palestine. An election call now gives Netanyahu an excuse to tell global leaders that peace negotiations are now on hold. Israeli political scientist Gadi Wolfsfeld was quoted in the Time article as saying that one of the great things about elections is that it gets the world off his back. No one will be able to say, "What about the peace process?" because Netanyahu can say, "I'm sorry, I'm busy having elections now." If violence and unrest in Jerusalem and the West Bank continues, it will likely push more voters into Netanyahu's camp because he has positioned himself as the Israeli leader who is tough on terrorism. The more there's violence, says Wolfsfeld, the more his party's strength will go up. What was not reported in the mainstream, but may have some connection to the unfolding events in Israel, is a story posted on the Al Jazeera website on December the 2nd. This article reported that the UN General Assembly approved an Arab-backed resolution calling on Israel to renounce possession of nuclear weapons and put its nuclear facilities under international oversight. The resolution, adopted in a 161-5 vote on Tuesday, noted that Israel is the only Middle Eastern country that is not party to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. It called on Israel to accede to that treaty without further delay, not to develop, produce, test, or otherwise acquire nuclear weapons, and to renounce possession of nuclear weapons. The resolution also called on Israel to put its nuclear facilities under the safeguard of the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency. The United States and Canada, unsurprisingly, were among 4 countries that joined Israel in opposing the measure, while 18 countries abstained, according to the Associated Press. Israel is widely considered to possess nuclear arms, but declines to confirm it. Although not legally binding, the fact that all 193 UN member states are represented in any vote means that there is greater moral pressure to act upon a motion. The wild card in this upcoming Israeli election may be whether or not the messages of courageous Israeli soldiers, Jewish rabbis, or even some among the general population who are recognizing the increasing isolation of their leader will be enough to shift the tide of rising consciousness in Israel at this time. Following up on resolutions earlier this year against Russia for its alleged invasion of Ukraine and its alleged shooting down of a Malaysian Airlines jet last March, the U.S. House of Representatives has taken the next step in its attempt to push and bait Russia into further acts of aggression, which would support the war agenda by this global banking cabal. The South African news website Sowetan Live had reported back in March various headlines such as "World leaders say Russian invasion of Ukraine could spiral into biggest international crisis since the Cold War." And another headline, "Obama says Russia is on the wrong side of history on Ukraine." And another headline, "U.S. House passes resolution calling for sanctions against Russia." Headlines similar to these echoed around the world on many Western and mainstream news programs and websites. RT appears to be one of the few sources reporting on December the 4th that the U.S. House of Representatives resolution passed on last Tuesday, declares not only war against Russia, but a war for Kiev against Donetsk and Lugansk. This according to Daniel McAdams, Executive Director at the Ron Paul Institute. What is perhaps a bit strange is that I could not find many headlines in the mainstream news pages covering this vote. In the U.S. at this time, however, the emphasis appears to be on increasing racial tensions and violence, perhaps in an attempt to get people angry enough to revolt violently, an outcome that will hopefully not manifest as more people see through the lies and choose not to take the bait of leaders trying to create fear and greater control over the people. RT spoke with Paul Craig Roberts about the vote. Pay attention to what is said at the beginning and then observe the slight difference towards the end. This may be an example of a message that contains truth while also planting a message of a different kind. I'm not saying that this is the case, but I am trying to help teach people to listen to what is said by others and learn how to question things critically. Disregard the voices in the background, as this was part of the video background that accompanied this particular interview.
Russia needs to understand that the United States has an ideology of world hegemony and does not accept any prospect of any country being sovereign and acting on its own. You have to be an American vassal state. So just as the United States has turned all of Europe, Canada, Australia, Japan into vassal states, that is the only terms on which the United States can accept Russia and China. It will not accept them as sovereign, independent countries following their own interests. And so the demonization of Russia's leader and of the country will continue, and the situation will become more and more hostile. It's not going to go away because the United States is guided by the neoconservative ideology of American world hegemony, and that means hegemony over Russia and China.
Now, the resolution accuses Russia of building and providing the missile which shot down the MH17 airliner, but the official investigation is yet to determine what actually caused the crash. So why did the lawmakers have to include these accusations in the resolution, do you believe?
It's propaganda. Facts don't play a role in this. I think if the Russian government is relying on facts, it's going to be greatly surprised because Washington has no interest whatsoever in facts. Did Saddam Hussein have weapons of mass destruction? Did Assad of Syria use chemical weapons against his own people? Did Iran have nuclear weapons? Of course not. And of course Washington knew they were lying. Look, this House resolution is identical to what Adolf Hitler said when he announced that last night Polish troops crossed the frontier and attacked Germany. There's no difference. The United States overthrows the government of Ukraine and then accuses Russia of invading the country. This is not worth talking about. This is blatant, obvious propaganda designed to make a demon out of Russia. That's the only purpose of this. It's not going to go away.
You know, there are strong statements, and the resolution lays the blame for the 4,000 deaths in East Ukraine squarely on Russia. What do you make of that? Because it's an incredible statement, really.
It's just more propaganda. It's no different from the lies they told about Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein and Assad and Iran. It's the same lies they told when Georgia, provoked by Washington, attacked South Ossetia, and the Russians came in and pushed them back out. That was also said to be an invasion by Russia. Facts don't matter to propaganda. Washington is using propaganda. You know, the Russians need to wake up. They have an enemy. The enemy intends to destroy you. That's what the fact is. There's no sense playing that this is somehow a mistake or we can get the facts out and or people will come to their senses. The United States has a policy of world hegemony, and you're seeing that. That is what is being operating. They are operating world hegemony. They cannot stand another state with enough power to get in their way. And so what happened? Russia got in the way of the invasion of Syria. It got in the way of the invasion of Iran. Now, at the time, Washington was fully used up in the Middle East in the wars and couldn't do anything about it. But it's sort of extracting itself from those wars, and now it's focusing on Russia, which is a potential constraint on the ability of Washington to dictate to the world. And that's exactly what's going on. It's the use of propaganda to achieve hegemony.
What struck me as a bit odd was Robert's assertion that Russia has to wake up, that it has an enemy. The implication here seems to be that Roberts feels that Russia is not already aware of this, and Roberts appears to be suggesting that Russia should be taking a greater warlike posture against the U.S., which is what the global cabal wants. I could be wrong, but Roberts seems to feel that Putin is not aware of this, and he cannot see the strategy that Putin is already playing. And it is a strategy that seems to be winning, despite what pundits and the Western media are saying. Each listener will have to reflect on this and decide whether or not he or she resonates with this or any of the comments shared in the current moment of now. In a separate RT article, Daniel McAdams, executive director of the Ron Paul Institute, was quoted as saying, "The House of Representatives is discussing a resolution that condemns Russian actions in Ukraine. The motion describes Russia as an authoritarian regime and calls for the reinforcement of NATO and the sale of U.S. natural gas to Europe so they don't need to buy energy from Russia." When asked to comment on the comments by Representative Dennis Kucinich that the resolution is a throwback to the Cold War era, McAdams replied, saying that, "I spent nearly 12 years on Capitol Hill working for a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and I know exactly how these resolutions are drafted. It was not drafted by a member of Congress who is credited with saying it," and that being Mr. Kinzinger of Illinois. "These are drafted by special interests, and they are handed to the members of Congress who are favored, who behave themselves in the committee, and they get the glory of introducing a bill. The U.S. media has been pushing this propaganda against Russia's Putin for months and months. So Congress feels it has to do something to remain relevant and catch up with the people. But these resolutions are all put together and written by special interests, and members feel that they can't vote no on them. You can say no on the one hand because it is just a resolution and has no force of law, but if you read the bill, it is almost comical, and that everything that it accuses Russia of doing, the U.S. and the U.S. government in particular, has been doing certainly on its own since last year. And one of the big complaints of the bill is how mean it is that Russia is putting forth anti-American propaganda when this is exactly what Congress has been doing for the last year. It is almost comical. It accuses Russia of holding fraudulent elections, which are pretty serious charges. Several occasions in the bill it mentions Chapter 5 of the NATO Treaty, which requires all NATO members to come to the military assistance of others. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. I don't know if Congress understands what that means. In commenting about the timing of the resolutions coming from Congress, McAdams noted that this is a green light for the Poroshenko government to resume military actions against the separatists in East Ukraine. If you read the resolution very, very early on, it encourages him to retake this territory. So it is not only a declaration of a U.S. Cold War against Russia, but it is a declaration of war for Kiev against Donetsk and Lugansk. For now, Russia and Vladimir Putin do not appear to be taking the Western bait for conflict and war. There does not appear to be any conclusive proof that Russia has engaged in definitive physical acts of aggression, and Western media attempts to show such proof appear to have collapsed under the weight of increased scrutiny by observant people worldwide. The only thing left is media propaganda and rhetoric, full of sound and fury, yet signifying nothing. Dmitry Babich, writing in an article on thebricspost.com last November 9th, noted how the actions by the U.S. actually pushed China and Russia closer, and that the U.S. is now reaping the consequences of its sanctions and its actions. Babich quotes a comment published in the Moscow-based Expert magazine, Russia's leading weekly, specializing in economic analysis, as saying that it is clear that the economic influence of the U.S. and the West in general will inevitably decline in the coming years, but the Obama administration and the European Union seem to have chosen the costliest and the most painful way to manage this process. Babich observes that the anti-Beijing and anti-Moscow clique behind Washington's foreign policy, which became all too apparent in recent years, is pushing not only Russia and China, but also other BRICS countries to common protective measures against the U.S. This is what the world is now starting to witness on a global scale. Despite the challenges now facing the Israeli Prime Minister on his home turf and from within his own government, Netanyahu still managed to find some time to issue a warning to France in response to its vote regarding the recognition of the Palestinian state. Back on November 24th, France24.com had posted an article quoting Netanyahu as saying that recognition of a Palestinian state by France would be a grave mistake. The state of Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, the only state that we have, and the Palestinians demanding a state do not want to recognize the right to have a state for the Jewish people. Just hours earlier on that same day, the Israeli cabinet had voted 14-6 in favor of a controversial proposal to officially recognize under law Israel's status as the national homeland of the Jewish people. The France 24 article goes on to note that France's plans for a non-binding but highly symbolic vote follows similar resolutions passed by the British and Spanish parliaments and an official decision to recognize Palestine by the Swedish government. Sweden's move infuriated Israel, which responded by recalling its ambassador to Stockholm. A draft of the proposal in France invites the French government to use the recognition of the state of Palestine as an instrument to gain a definitive resolution of the conflict. European leaders have shown signs of mounting impatience with Israel over its continued settlement building on Palestinian land. The warning, however, did not carry any weight. RT reported on December the 2nd that France's socialist-led parliament passed a symbolic vote to recognize the Palestinian statehood despite the opposition. MPs in Britain and Spain followed with their motions as noted moments ago. The proposal was passed with 339 votes in favor and 151 against, meaning that it was supported by more than two-thirds of French lawmakers. The article adds that the vote is non-binding, but sends a signal that Israelis and Palestinians must return to the negotiations of U.S.-mediated statehood talks in April. Of course, as mentioned a short while ago, the new election in Israel allows Netanyahu to stall these negotiations even longer. In Ukraine, there are unconfirmed reports coming out now that at least one fight has broken out within the Ukraine parliament as the knowledge filters down to politicians that they have quietly become a U.S. state. Several alternative news sites have carried the story, but information has not been forthcoming from some of the larger, more mainstream alternative news sites. A story submitted by Tyler Durden for ZeroHedge.com on December 4th was accompanied by a video allegedly showing a confrontation within the Ukraine parliament on the 2nd of December. The fight erupted after it was announced that there would be 3 new foreign-born members of the Ukraine parliament. It was announced that Natalie Jaresko, Ivaris Abramovicius, and Alexander Kvitashvili were approved as ministers by Ukraine's parliament on December the 2nd. The article writes that after the vote, the People's Deputy Vladimir Parasyuk began requiring word in explanation of vote, but the chairman of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, Volodymyr Groysman, refused it. President Petro Poroshenko said their appointment, which has raised some eyebrows in Ukraine, was part of an effort to find, quote, innovative solutions in the government, unquote, due to the extraordinary challenges facing Ukraine. Poroshenko naturalized all 3 just hours before their confirmation by Parliament. All have given up their citizenships to comply with Ukraine's constitutional ban on dual citizenship. The most notable is the appointment of Jaresko, an American who moved to Kiev in 1992, just months after Ukraine gained independence from the Soviet Union, to head the economic department of the newly opened U.S. Embassy. Prior to her relocation, she held various economic positions in the U.S. State Department. Jaresko will be taking on the role of finance minister, even though she is unelected. As this news starts getting around, perhaps the people will have something else to say about how they were scammed out of their country and forced into a conflict that never existed in the first place, but was staged. Over to the Canadian Parliament now, the other cabal-controlled puppet government in North America. An article appearing on the CBC.ca news website on December the 3rd is reporting on the fallout of an action taken by the Canadian government in September. The executive summary of the story is this. The Canadian Wheat Board, CWB, the primary regulatory body overseeing the grain industry in Canada, was going to be put up for sale. A large group of farmers, hurting from lower monetary yields from wheat sales, came together to make an offer to take over the board and bring it back to profitability, and then the farmers would also begin to profit. The Canadian government, however, did not allow this. Instead of accepting a monetary offer from Canadian farmers, they chose instead to give the assets of the wheat board away to an American businessman for no charge at all. For the background information, the CBC story writes that it takes a lot to get farmers out to meetings in the middle of a harvest. But that's what happened across the prairie provinces this past fall when farmers of North America, the FNA, made a last-minute appeal in a bid for what's left of the Canadian Wheat Board. The Farmer Investor Group already has about 3,000 producers purchasing shares in a fertilizer plant. The CWB's grain handling capabilities could help them hit the ground running on a distribution strategy. Farmers had record yields but dismal margins in 2013, so when the FNA had 1,000 farmers express interest in turning the wheat board into a 90% farmer-owned enterprise, they weren't driven by nostalgia. The motive was all business. The new partnership would retain the investment and put money back in farmers' pockets once profitable. Whoever owns the hopper cars owns the game, as FNA Vice President Bob Friesen put it. Grain Growers of Canada President Gary Stanford said the CWB doesn't need a small Canadian-owned partner like FNA. It needs one that can bring things such as West Coast port facilities to the table. Here's what happened this week in the Canadian Parliament regarding this story.
Speaker, Farmers of North America, a group of more than 3,000 Canadian farmer investors, recently offered to buy the Canadian wheat board. For get this, about $250 to $300 million they thought it was worth. The Conservatives rejected the offer, didn't give a reason, just said no. Now we hear the minister will hand over the wheat board's assets to the private sector for a grand total, get this, Mr. Speaker, zero. Oh. That's right. Nothing. Nada. No thank you, just give it away. So, simple question, Mr. Speaker. Why would the Conservative government give away these assets free to multinational corporations instead of simply selling it to Canadian farmers and actually gaining a real value for Canadian farmers? Mr. Speaker, the easy answer is absolutely none of that is true or based on any kind of fact at all. Farmers of North America, their bid was adjudicated by a third-party auditor and legal team that the CWB put in place. This is not a political process, Mr. Speaker. As to the assets of the CWB, they will become part of a privatization plan as they look to recapitalize with another partner. That's exactly what's happening, Mr. Speaker. Under the auspices, as I said, all these tenders are looked at through the eyes of a third-party audit team as well as a legal team.
Let's see if I understand the Conservatives' business plan for the Canadian wheat board. First, you take the largest and most successful grain marketing company in the world, and then you give it away free of charge to an American agri-food giant who until recently was your greatest competitor. Mr. Speaker, my question is simple, and I ask it through you. Has the minister lost his freaking mind, or is he not?
The article closes with the speculation that the reason Harper will not give any control back to the farmers of Canada is that he is trying to clear the decks of as much opposition as possible to facilitate an easier chance at getting elected in next year's election. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the kinds of games that are perpetrated in parliaments around the world under the illusion of democracy, creating rules that do not benefit humanity or the planet, but only those who know how to take advantage of the systems of money and the systems of law, or at least that which is being claimed as law. In the financial news for this week, there is a bit of news also relating to Ukraine. A few moments ago, we heard that fights were breaking out in Parliament. That story stems also from another story which was also carried by Zero Hedge on December the 2nd. CVN had reported a few weeks back that sources within Ukraine had admitted that there was almost no gold left in its central bank vault. In this article, it is written that following a stunning announcement by the head of Ukraine's central bank, Valeria Gontareva, on primetime TV, we learned that virtually all of Ukraine's gold was gone. The article goes on to write that it was only a matter of time before Ukraine's people, the vast majority of whom are innocent pawns in a vast game of realpolitik between the West and East, finally got angry and demanded some answers, if not heads. That time came earlier today when, as Interfax.ua reported, a Kiev-based court has instructed Kiev prosecutors to bring an action against National Bank of Ukraine Governor Valeria Gontareva on charges of abuse of power or misuse of office to obtain illegal profit, the Vesti newspaper reported on Tuesday. Sadly, here is what it is coming down to. The article writes, and while it remains to be seen if this will be the spark that lights the counter-revolution, others are already sensing which way the wind is blowing. After all, it took Egypt about a year to turn against the puppet regime dumped upon it by the CIA and the U.S. State Department. As Bloomberg reported, another central banker, Olena Sherbakova, who is head of the monetary policy at the Ukrainian Central Bank, announced that she was resigning. When reached by phone, she stated that she has the right to step down without giving a reason. She does, although we doubt even a former Goldman Sachs partner would be willing to replace her, as the realization among the Ukraine people finally seeps through that they were thoroughly betrayed by the same people who promised they would fix the country following the February presidential coup. The events in Ukraine have broken families and also friendships. I have experienced this personally, as two friends of mine in Sweden chose to end their friendship with me because of what I was reporting about Ukraine. They were upset with me because they felt I did not understand the true historical relationship between Ukraine and Russia. They were adamant in their beliefs that Russia is the enemy. Maybe they still believe this. I don't know. In a late addition to this story, an article was found on the Syrian Free Press blog site on December the 5th. In this article, a Ukrainian general reveals the total Zionist control of his country. The video appearing on this page is in Ukrainian with English subtitles. Assuming, of course, that this is a real general, he states that numerous public officials, including the Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk, as being agents of the CIA. He also says that Mr. Yatsenyuk is the first deputy head of a Masonic lodge in Ukraine. He mentions how officials are connected and how they benefited, and he says that the current situation in Ukraine is simply the direct occupation of Ukraine by the U.S. The video goes on from there. It is said, however, and at the end of the day, it is my hope that perhaps they and all the people in Ukraine will come to fully understand how their country was used by the U.S. and the global banking cabal and its partners in the EU, UK, Israel, and others. I fully understood that people in Ukraine were hurt by the policies of the old Soviet Union. Russia, however, is not the old Soviet Union. The Ukrainian people had been sold the American dream and the beauty of a freedom that is only an illusion, but perhaps it just looked better. As they say, the grass is always greener over the septic tank. There are different kinds of enslavement. The enslavement of the former Soviet Union was more overt and visible to the public eye, and therefore easy to criticize and challenge. The enslavement of the Western system of capitalistic democracy is very subversive and not easily seen at all. It is hidden behind the lies and frauds of the fractional reserve system of fiat banking and also within the lies and frauds of the commercial system of admiralty law. Both systems use language that is not easily understood by the masses, and there is a reason for this. It is used to keep their systems exclusive, and the only people who get in are the ones who understand the language, the rules, and are willing to play at the expense of humans and our planet. The people of Ukraine, unfortunately, traded off what they believed was a more overt system of enslavement to one that they did not even see coming, because they fell for the marketing strategy hook, line, and sinker. They are not alone, however. So many other countries have also fallen victim to the charade, and this is why people around the world, and especially in countries like Iceland, are beginning to call out the schemes and hold bankers and politicians accountable. If there are good people within the Ukrainian parliamentary system, they would be wise to study Iceland and implement a strategy very similar, and not allow a foreign U.S. economist to become finance minister of their country. Moving over to Russia now, an article by Dmitry Kalinichenko and translated by Christina Rust, appearing on the Real Syrian Free Press blog page, outlines a bit more of the golden trap of chessmaster Vladimir Putin. This would be an elaboration on the strategy that Paul Craig Roberts earlier did not seem to express any awareness of. The blog starts out with the following. Accusations of the West towards Putin traditionally are based on the fact that he worked in the KGB, and therefore he is a cruel and immoral person. Putin is blamed for everything, but nobody ever accused Putin of lack of intelligence. Any accusations against this man only emphasize his ability for quick analytical thinking and making clear and balanced political and economic decisions. Often, Western media compares this ability with the ability of a grand master conducting a public chess simulation. Recent developments in U.S. economy and the West in general allow us to conclude that in this part of the assessment of Putin's personality, Western media is absolutely right. Kalinichenko continues by asking, what is the truly tragic predicament of the West and the United States in which they find themselves, and why are all the Western media and leading Western economists silent about this, as though it was a well-guarded military secret? let's try to understand the essence of current economic events in the context of the economy, setting aside the factors of morality, ethics, and geopolitics. After realizing its failure in Ukraine, the West, led by the U.S., set out to destroy Russian economy by lowering oil prices and accordingly gas prices as the main budget sources of export revenue in Russia and the main sources of replenishment of Russian gold reserves. It should be noted that the main failure of the West in Ukraine is not military or political, but in the actual refusal of Putin to fund the Western project of Ukraine at the expense of the budget of the Russian Federation. To put this into perspective, Kalinichenko offers the analogies of both chess and judo. Putin is using the strength and resources of the U.S. and the global banking cabal against themselves, while using very little of Russia's own resources, a strategy that the U.S. was not counting on. Kalinichenko writes, "Very few people understand what Putin is doing at the moment, and almost no one understands what he will do in the future. No matter how strange it may seem, but right now Putin is selling Russian oil and gas only for physical gold. Putin is not shouting about it all over the world, and of course he still accepts US dollars as an intermediate means of payment, but he immediately exchanges all these dollars obtained from the sale of oil and gas for physical gold. So Russia will accept gold or USD for payment, but the US dollars are not held onto, but immediately used to buy gold, since the USD is basically a worthless currency anyway." Kalinichenko notes the following: "Thus, the Western world, built on the hegemony of the petrodollar, is in a catastrophic situation, in which it cannot survive without oil and gas supplies from Russia, and Russia is now ready to sell its oil and gas to the West only in exchange for physical gold. The twist of Putin's game is that the mechanism for the sale of Russian energy to the West only for gold now works regardless of whether the West agrees to pay for Russian oil and gas with its artificially cheap gold or not. Russia benefits from uranium also, which it sells to the U.S. The consequence is the following. In exchange for Russian oil, gas, and uranium, the West pays Russia with dollars, purchasing power of which is artificially inflated against oil and gold by the efforts of the West. But Putin uses these dollars only to withdraw physical gold from the West in exchange for the price denominated in US dollars, artificially lowered by the same Western group. This truly brilliant economic combination by Putin puts the West, led by the United States, in a position of a snake aggressively and diligently devouring its own tail. The U.S. is realizing that it cannot do to Russia what it did to countries like Yugoslavia, Iraq, or Libya. Kalinichenko closes his lengthy article this way: "The Western economic establishment can see and understand the essence of the situation. Leading Western economists are certainly aware of the severity of the predicament and hopelessness of the situation the Western world finds itself in Putin's economic gold trap. After all, since the Bretton Woods Agreement, we all know the golden rule. Who has more gold sets the rules. But everyone in the West is silent about it. Silent because no one knows how to get out of the situation. If you explain to the Western public all the details of the looming economic disaster, the public will ask the supporters of the petrodollar world the most terrible questions, which will sound like this. How long will the West be able to buy oil and gas from Russia in exchange for physical gold? And what will happen to the U.S. petrodollar after the West runs out of physical gold to pay for Russian oil, gas, and uranium, as well as to pay for Chinese goods? No one in the West today can answer these seemingly simple questions. And this is called checkmate, ladies and gentlemen. The game is over." The link to the full article will be in the show summary. In general news this week, I'd like to share a conversation that took place recently between a man the people know as Judge Napolitano and TV talk show host Jon Stewart. Napolitano was a guest on Stewart's program. For those who are unfamiliar with this individual, Napolitano, according to his website, is a graduate of Princeton University and the University of Notre Dame Law School. He is the youngest life-tenured Superior Court judge in the history of the state of New Jersey. He sat on the bench from 87 to 95 when he presided over more than 150 jury trials and thousands of motions, sentencings, and hearings. Napolitano taught constitutional law and jurisprudence at Delaware Law School for 2 years and at Seton Hall Law School for 11 years. He was often chosen by the students as their most outstanding professor. He returned to private practice in '95 and began television work in the same year. As the senior judicial analyst for Fox News since 1998, Napolitano broadcasts nationwide on the Fox News channel throughout the day, Monday through Friday. He is nationally known for watching and reporting on the government as it takes liberty and property.
Civil liberties, yes. Something you and I agree on. We agree. Is it something that you feel, is it like a beach body? Can you get it back after it's gone? Is it the kind of thing that once it erodes, we have no ability to reclaim it? And what is the process of reclaiming it?
We rarely reclaim it once the government takes it from us.
Mm-hmm.
We're still paying off debt on World War I. We're still suffering under laws that made it a crime to disagree with the government in World War I.
Right.
Because government likes power. It's easier for it to accomplish its purposes when it doesn't have a nasty thing like freedom of speech in the way. So I write these books. I'm an equal opportunity criticizer, as you know. This goes after George W. Bush and Barack Obama. I write these books so the American public knows that with every tick of the clock, liberty is being lost.
But it's not just executive power. For instance, you know, with Barack Obama, with his the bombing campaign in Iraq and Syria, Congress could have stepped in.
Congress is as much a culprit as President Bush and President Obama have been. Congress could stop a lot of this with a majority vote. They lack the political will to do it. Members of both parties. The Democrats give too much power to Democrats.
The judiciary could step in.
Absolutely. Listen. We need to know that our rights come from our humanity and not from the government.
But they're not understanding that. But let's also be realistic about people. Now, let's use the Middle East as an example, Egypt as an example.
Right.
They have this amazing revolution. Millions take to the streets, call for the overthrow of an autocratic regime. They bring in a democratic system. They elect the Muslim Brotherhood, a group that we don't like. They institute certain things that people don't like. They rise up again. General Sisi takes over, really cracks down on civil liberties. The people couldn't be happier.
I don't know that the people couldn't be happier. I think
he's very popular right now.
I think he's popular because he's giving away the store, but he's taken more liberties than Mubarak did. And the reason he let Mubarak out of jail is so that when he gets overthrown, he won't have to go to jail.
You think he's the next dictator?
Yes,
but
I do.
My point being this. Is the problem really the government, or does it lie in us and our desire for safety and for law and order and for authority?
On that, we agree. Because when the people are afraid, they will surrender their liberties for safety. So it is in the government's interest to keep the people afraid, so that we will pay more taxes, let them regulate more of our behavior, and they can put their arms around us and supposedly keep us safe.
But shouldn't there be a distinction between when we should be afraid? Are there times we should be afraid? Is there nothing to fear? Shouldn't we fear people pouring toxins into water?
Well, of course we should fear those things. And of course there should be laws against it.
It's a balance.
But it's not a balance. It's a bias in favor of freedom. A bias in favor of freedom. Freedom and safety are not equals.
Yes.
Freedom is the default.
I see what you're saying.
Because we are born with freedom.
Yeah.
With public sentiment, nothing can succeed, and without it, nothing can fail. It is because public sentiment permits a weak Congress and an authoritarian president that we have one. You know what president that was?
Lincoln.
Abe Lincoln.
Yeah.
See what I sport him?
Yeah, you are a sport. You throw me a Lincoln bone there. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Better than the pig bone that you threw at.
So your feeling, though, is that we need to manage this more actively, but that it's because I look at it like the executive branch was much stronger and then Nixon after Watergate, they took back the power through Congress. Then Congress abdicated that power.
Yes, Congress abdicates way too much power. The Republicans gave too much power to George W. Bush, and the Democrats let Barack Obama get away with the exercise of too much.
So how do you address this bias that should be towards freedom but ends up towards authority?
You remind government, and the people in the police department in Ferguson, Missouri, should be reminded of right, with the cameras.
All right.
That they are the servants,
right?
That they work for us. We don't work for them.
But what's so great about us?
We are sovereign as individuals, and our rights come from our humanity and not from the government. We give away a little bit of those rights to form a government to protect the rights that we don't give away. My views about the government are not going to come into the majority overnight. It's not going to change overnight, even if everybody who read this book agrees with me.
Has there ever been a society that followed the dictates that you're talking about? Like, for you to say that this country was better in the 1880s, I think most people, honestly, not out of fear, not out of thing, would disagree with that.
I think they probably would. I disagree.
No. But I mean, would disagree with that not because of a weakness, not because of a lack of understanding of human freedom, but by feeling that the conditions in the country made for the majority less freedom.
When the president, and I'm talking about several now, can torture people, can spy on people, can kill people, can spend money that's not authorized, and the public lets him do it, and the Congress lets him do it. It's a very sad state of affairs.
That I completely agree with. Completely. That I completely agree with.
Although there were a few comments during the full interview to which I personally didn't resonate, I think the summary provides a good overview that people of all countries, and not just the U.S., would be wise to consider and reflect upon as they begin questioning their own politicians about their actions and behaviors. The links and the full video will be in the show summary. In disclosure-related news for the week, it is being commonly reported in the mainstream that NASA has now completed the first test flight of its new deep space vehicle dubbed Orion. NASA has hinted that this vehicle will open the doors to Mars and allow travel to the red planet by 2030. However, as many regular listeners already know, travel has already been taking place to this planet, and that the planet itself, contrary to what has been told to the public, allegedly has an atmosphere that is breathable. Another individual is speaking out on the truth as it relates to Mars, and this individual is known as Captain K. This individual apparently first came forth sometime around last March. The captain's real name is Randy Kramer, and he came forward to reveal that he had spent 17 years on Mars as part of a highly classified program called Mars Defense Force. He then claims to have spent almost 3 years with a secret space fleet called the Earth Defense Force, where he flew anti-gravity vehicles throughout the solar system and was promoted to captain. In his most recent interview with XO News TV, Kramer reveals that about a year ago he was contacted by his military superiors to disclose the truth about his covert service on Mars and his time with the secret space fleet. Michael Sala of XO News TV has this report.
In March 2014, Captain K, whose real name is Randy Kramer, came forward to reveal that he had spent 17 years on Mars as part of a highly classified program called the Mars Defense Force. He then claims to have spent almost 3 years with a secret space fleet called the Earth Defense Force, where he flew anti-gravity vehicles throughout the solar system and was promoted to captain. In his most recent interview with XO News TV, Kramer reveals that about a year ago he was contacted by his military superiors to disclose the truth about his covert service on Mars and time with the secret space fleet. Kramer revealed that a year ago he was contacted by 2 U.S. Marine Corps Special Section officers whom he trained under during his initial training as a youth in a covert program called Operation Moonshadow. The first to contact him was a Colonel Jamison, who then put him in touch with a Brigadier General Smythe. Kramer claims that they contacted him via an implant at the back of his skull where he could hear them through a means of electronic telepathy. The two officers confirmed important parts of Kramer's testimony concerning his 20-year tour of duty before being time and age reversed back to age 17. They also confirmed his military service with both the Mars Defense Force and the secret space fleet. The two officers claimed that classified projects involving extraterrestrial technologies had been compromised and now were a national security threat. In his most recent interview, Kramer gave details about secret technologies he encountered during his 70-year service on Mars. Teleportation technologies were used to transport personnel and equipment to various locations. He also encountered small animals on the Mars surface. Most importantly, the Martian atmosphere is breathable to humans, suggesting that NASA claims that the atmosphere is 96% carbon dioxide with trace amounts of oxygen is a lie. Kramer's testimony is certainly controversial, so is he telling the truth? Regarding his most recent revelation, electronic telepathy has been shown to be an operational form of communication used in classified programs. In Controlling the Human Mind, Dr. Nick Begich described electronic telepathy technologies and their covert use. It is possible for Captain Kramer's former superior to contact him in this way. Regarding the existence of small animal life on the surface of Mars, a succession of NASA rover images have shown what appear to be rodents, lizards, and birds on the Mars surface. Finally, other whistleblowers have come forward to claim that they have also travelled to or been invited to spend time on Martian bases. One of these is Laura Magdalene Eisenhower, the great-granddaughter of President Dwight Eisenhower. While confirmation of Kramer's testimony is still needed, his latest claim that two of his former military superiors have contacted him and authorized him to come forward is a significant development. If senior U.S. military officials are authorizing whistleblowers to come forward for national security reasons, the truth about classified space programs on Mars and elsewhere in our solar system may not remain secret for most people.
Another soft disclosure may have taken place recently as a Soyuz rocket prepared to dock with the International Space Station. According to an article appearing on the Disclose.tv website, the article reports that European Space Agency astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti was preparing to dock with the space station when a brilliant orange light suddenly begins to reflect off the solar panels of the pod, and what Samantha sees both shocks and awes her. You can hear her voice in the video. She saw something powerfully lit up that came to greet her. A glowing UFO must have appeared near her to say welcome. Now, as you all know, sightings of UFOs at the space station is a weekly event, sometimes so close it's docked to the station and other times far in the distance. Astronauts are prepared for everything and are always the toughest and most fearless of the pick. The only thing that could cause such an emotional reaction from a tried-and-true astronaut would be a close-up encounter with an alien craft. Listen to her voice. She was blown away. Cristoforetti later stated the following: "As I turned to look out at the beginning, I looked back and saw one of the solar panels of our Soyuz. Then my eyes caught something in my peripheral vision. As I turned around slowly, when I realized what I was seeing, I was overwhelmed by sheer amazement and joy. The space station was there, but it was not just any view. The enormous solar panels were inundated with a blaze of orange light, vivid, warm, almost alien. I could not help but exclaim something out loud. You can probably hear in the recordings of our docking, because at that point we were at open mic with Mission Control, and Anton reminded me of it, so I tried to contain my amazement and returned to the monitoring of docking. When I peeked again later, the orange glow was gone." I would not be surprised at all if more reports from the International Space Station begin to filter out into the alternative and mainstream media news. In tech news for this week, yet another development is being reported during this past week relating to potential fuel and energy sources for the future. Steve Connor, reporting for the London Independent, wrote on November 26th that a recently discovered form of carbon graphite, the material in pencil lead, has turned out to have a completely unexpected property which could revolutionize the development of green energy and electric cars. Researchers have discovered that graphene allows positively charged hydrogen atoms or protons to pass through it despite being completely impermeable to all other gases, including hydrogen itself. The implications of the discovery are immense, as it could dramatically increase the efficiency of fuel cells, which generate electricity directly from hydrogen, the scientists said. An article about the same story posted on RT's website on November 28th also noted that an even more exciting development is the possibility of sieving hydrogen from the air in future and using it to react with oxygen in a fuel cell, which could then produce electricity and water without leaving a carbon footprint. Essentially, you pump your fuel from the atmosphere and get electricity out of this fuel, in principle. Before this paper, this wouldn't even be speculation. It would be science fiction. At least our paper provides a guidance and proof that this kind of device is possible and doesn't contradict to any known laws of nature. Professor André Geim of Manchester University, who leads the study, said, as cited by The Independent. We are very excited about this result because it opens a whole new era of promising applications for graphene in clean energy harvesting and hydrogen-based technologies, said Marcelo Lozada Hidalgo, co-researcher on the study. The following audio clip, put out by SciShow, offers a bit more understanding of graphene, its composition, and its potential.
Graphene. Everybody's talking about it. When hearing some of its basic properties, you might have wondered if people were confusing it with some kind of substance only found in comic books. It's 1 atom thick, conducts electricity better than silver, conducts heat better than diamond, and it's stronger than steel. It would take the focused force of an elephant balancing on a pencil point to pierce through a piece of graphene as thick as plastic wrap. And yet, graphite is made of the same stuff. And yeah, that crumbly stuff used to make your pencil is a lot less impressive. So what's up? Graphene is made of carbon, and carbon has only 2 naturally occurring crystalline structures. Graphite, which is just stacks and stacks of graphene piled on top of each other, and diamond, which is a network of carbon atoms arranged into tetrahedrons, one after the other. For being composed of entirely the same element, those 2 things don't seem to have a lot in common. Diamond is clear, graphite is black. Diamond is a nearly perfect electrical insulator, while graphite is both a great conductor of heat and electricity. The differences between these substances all come down to the arrangement of their atoms. Carbon has 4 outer electrons. In diamond, all 4 of those electrons bond to carbon atoms around it, forming those tetrahedrons. This makes for an extremely rigid and strong crystal. It's an insulator because there are no leftover electrons to carry a current, and it's clear because light can't easily excite electrons that are tied up in such stable bonds, which is where they'd otherwise be absorbed. Graphite, on the other hand, is a crystalline form of carbon in which each atom is only bonded to 3 other carbon atoms. Those atoms form a 2-dimensional sheet of hexagons in which each atom has 1 unpaired electron left over. And those electrons will go flying across the matrix of atoms if you apply an electric current, allowing it to readily conduct electricity. They also gobble up any photons coming their way, which is why graphite is black. But while graphite is a great conductor, its natural form consists of layers of those sheets. So if a current is applied to it, those free electrons have lots of different directions they can go in, taking tangents up and down and left, right, and so on. But if you strip away just a single layer, forming graphene, then you have what amounts to an electron superhighway, a flat matrix of carbon atoms for that current to fly across. And those sheets of carbon are pretty easy to separate because they're not molecularly bonded to each other. That's why graphite is so soft. Instead, they're held together by van der Waals bonds, kind of a weak electrostatic bond that's the same force that makes sticky tape sticky. And in fact, graphene was only discovered in 2004 when 2 physicists at the University of Manchester, André Geim and Konstantin Novoselov, decided to use sticky tape to peel off thinner and thinner layers from the slab of graphite. Eventually, they got a layer just 1 atom thick. So that's what it is. But what is it good for? Because of its terrific conductive properties, scientists are excited by the possibility of using graphene as a replacement for silicon in microchips. Not only can electrons move faster across graphene, they're also subjected to less noise. That means the electron can move from one side of the sheet to the other in a straight line without detouring around a whole lot of atomic potholes. Scientists think that graphene transistors could operate at frequencies of up to 1,000 gigahertz. That's 10 times the maximum of silicon. Another proposed use for graphene is in touchscreens. The topmost layer of a touchscreen has to be an excellent conductor of electricity, so the device can sense your fingertip. The material we use now is indium tin oxide, but it's both rare and brittle. Even ground into powder, graphene retains many of its extraordinary properties, so it could replace graphite or other forms of carbon in anything from car tires to AA batteries to make them stronger or more conductive. The biggest problem with graphene, though, is how hard it is to make. I mean, peeling off a tiny sheet at a time with sticky tape isn't really scalable. We can grow graphene sheets by heating up a sheet of hydrocarbons like methane until the hydrogen separates, leaving only the carbon behind, but the graphene we get from this is mostly low quality. Basically, it's hard to create a one-atom thick sheet of anything, and it's also really hard to get a completely pure sample of anything, and here we're trying to do both. But then again, the silicon industry faced the same purity problem 50 years ago, and we eventually solved that problem with time and some money. So with some more time and some more money, I'm sure we'll do the same thing for graphene.
What is interesting to note is that the BBC website posted a story last August reporting on hemp and its potential to be the same or possibly even better than graphene. James Morgan, in his article, reported that the waste fibers from hemp crops can be transformed into high-performance energy storage devices, according to scientists. They cooked cannabis bark into carbon nanosheets and built supercapacitors on a par with or better than graphene, which is the industry gold standard. Morgan also notes that in countries including China, Canada, and the UK, hemp can be grown industrial for clothing and building materials, but the leftover bast fiber, the inner bark, typically ends up as landfill. Dr. Mitland's team took these fibers and recycled them into supercapacitors, empty storage devices which are transforming the way electronics are powered. The article also explores other potential developments in terms of how bio-waste is contributing to studies relating to the development of future fuel cell technologies. Hemp, for example, being good for supercapacitors, and banana peels, which have great potential for sodium-ion batteries. The exciting thing is that this information is now being reported in the mainstream, and this may be a subtle indication of information that is being released to the public in ways that are not overwhelming to most. All links with the details and more information will be in the show summary. For listeners out there who are very much into high-tech information, or for those who are concerned about government spying on your internet work for global change, this story may have some information that is meaningful for you. The London Independent reported on November 22nd that a high-profile human rights organization has released a tool to help journalists and activists avoid government internet snooping. Amnesty International said the program, called Detect, would help expose spyware programs, some of which are used by governments to monitor journalists and activists. The program was developed by security researcher Claudio Guarnieri and is being launched in conjunction with other NGOs or non-governmental offices, Digital Gesellschaft, Electronic Frontier Foundation, and Privacy International. The article also notes that Marek Marcinski, head of military security and police at Amnesty International, said governments around the world were using cowardly methods to keep attacks on human rights abuses under wraps. Governments are increasingly using dangerous and sophisticated technology that allows them to read activists and journalists' private emails and remotely turn on their computer's camera or microphone to secretly record their activities, he said. They use the technology in a cowardly attempt to prevent abuses from being exposed. The software can detect bugs designed to monitor Skype conversations, which has been used in the past in countries with poor human rights records. The application can be downloaded freely on the net. One website, resistsurveillance.org, offers some more information for those wanting to do a bit of research. As far as I could tell, as of airtime, the application appears to be available for PCs, but it is unclear if it is available for Mac computers. This next tech story is a success story, one of using 3D printing technologies. Lisa Winter, in an article appearing on the iflscience.com website, reported on November 5th that thanks to 3D printing, high-quality prosthetic limbs are cheaper and easier to obtain than ever before. 12-year-old Leon McCarthy has been missing fingers on his left hand since birth due to lack of blood flow during his development. Within the womb, traditional prosthetic units to help people like Leon can run tens of thousands of dollars. In search of a cost-effective alternative, Leon's father discovered a YouTube video by inventor Ivan Owen. Owen and Richard von As from Johannesburg, South Africa, began to collaborate on a high-quality, low-cost 3D printed prosthetic. Because Owen and Van As do not hold a patent or charge to download the plans for the hand, the cost of materials is all that is required. Despite the materials being inexpensive, 3D printers still carry a hefty price tag. Fortunately, Leon's school owns a 3D printer and made it available. With only $10 in material and about 20 minutes with the printer, Leon now has a new cyborg hand with fingers able to close, which he sees as special but not different. The fingers are controlled by flexing the wrist, which pulls on cable tendons to close around the desired object. Leon is now able to grasp his backpack handle, hand a snack to a friend, and even grip the handlebars on his bike, just like any other kid with two hands. As Leon grows up, Paul will merely have to print another device to accommodate the larger wrist. Because the hands are so inexpensive to build, the two have been able to tweak different designs in order to find something to better suit Leon's needs. In this week's feel-good story, we look to an article posted in London's Daily Mail website on November 26th. This is a story about remembering one's roots and all the people who helped make this individual the man he became in the world. Julian Robinson writes in this article that a millionaire Chinese businessman has bulldozed the wooden huts and muddy roads where he grew up and built luxury homes for the people who live there. Zhang Zhihua was born in Zhongkeng village in the city of Jinyu, southern China, and said that his family had always been well looked after and supported by residents in his childhood. So when the 54-year-old ended up making millions in the steel industry, he decided to repay the favor for free. Robinson adds that the business tycoon decided to return to the village and give everybody a place of their own to live. 5 years ago, the area was run down and many lived in basic homes. But the area has been transformed in recent years, and now 72 families are enjoying life in luxury new flats. Meanwhile, 18 families who were particularly kind to the businessman were given villas of their own in a project costing over $6 million. After moving in, he even promised 3 meals a day to the older residents and people on low income to make sure they could get by. The multimillionaire made his money first of all in the construction industry and later by getting involved in the steel trade. He said, "I earned more money than I knew what to do with, and I didn't want to forget my roots. I always pay my debts and wanted to make sure the people who helped me when I was younger and my family were paid back." Elderly local Kyung Chu, who was 75, said, "I remember his parents. They were kind-hearted people who cared very much for others, and it's great that their son has inherited that kindness." Blessings to this very kind soul who has received so much from the world, but remembered at the same time who he really is, and unselfishly returned so much to others so that they may experience abundance in ways that they had never dreamed possible. As the new human and planetary consciousness continues to awaken, may many more souls remember the people and groups that helped them receive the abundance they have, and share it openly with those who helped, and perhaps even those who may not have directly helped. And in this week's final words, there appears to be an interesting paradox and perhaps even a bit of polarization within the community of humans that are dedicating their lives to the shifting human and planetary consciousness while co-creating this so-called new Earth that everyone is claiming to want. It seems everyone has his or her own 2 cents to chip in about how everyone needs to be in order to achieve the overall goal. By chipping in their personal comments about how others should think, speak, talk, and act, they are imposing their own conditions upon others to create the world that the individual is claiming and envisioning. This becomes a gray area within the movement for change. So many authors, presenters, and speakers are placed upon pedestals and considered to be celebrities within the global circle for their respective insights, and they make their millions telling you what you already know anyway, but you are willing to give your power and also your money away to an external source. You heard Judge Napolitano say it earlier about people willing to give up their freedoms. In this sense, it is about not recognizing or honoring the truth that lies within you, that may be speaking to you, but you are doubting it because there is someone out there who must be right because he or she is a celebrity and making millions. There are people who speak openly and passionately for global change, and they make millions. There are those who do not speak at all, but merely work in humble obscurity, perhaps meditating, perhaps serving in communities, and perhaps finding other ways to anchor the energies for this new Earth in their own respective ways. A song by Reba McEntire crossed my path this week. There were only a few lyrics to the song, but the whole song was almost entirely one sentence: pray for peace. To simply pray for peace is to suggest that we place our faith and our salvation on some external force or entity beyond us or outside of us. The question of whether or not this particular action is beneficial or life-honoring depends upon the awareness of the soul choosing that practice in that moment of now. It may be a practice that works for one, but it will not work for another because of the different space of awareness that exists between two or more souls. Is it therefore honorable for one to judge the practice as wrong just because it does not resonate with another soul in any moment of now? I have quoted the song Life Uncommon by Jewel, and again there is a lyric within this song that may be meaningful. She sings that there are plenty of people who pray for peace, but if praying were enough, it would have come to be. Let your words enslave no one, and the heavens will hush themselves to hear our voices ring out clearly with sounds of freedom. Another saying crossed my path this week. This saying was referencing this very subjective and elusive topic called truth. The saying goes like this: there is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. We are learning who we are through the experiences of being that which we are not. In the past few months, I have been facing one of my greater fears, and it also happens to be one of my core issues for this life path. I understand the fear and the extent to which I have been unwilling to face it in my life. I understand the power it has had over me, even though I have not liked it. I also know that it is something that needs to be faced, loved, forgiven, and released, for me and for the individual involved in this particular case. A soul may not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, if that is not the purpose or role of that soul. One may not become enlightened by making the darkness conscious, because one has the choice to allow oneself to be seduced by it. What is one's soul contract, and what free will choices is that one ready, willing, and able to make that determines or fulfills whether or not one becomes enlightened? So who is making the greatest difference in the world? Is it the millionaire speakers who receive their money, their recognition, and their celebrity status from millions of adoring fans who are dependent upon their word? Is it the much poorer, humble servants who are reaching out to souls in need in whatever ways are needed? Are they the people who sit and pray in church week after week? Are they the monks who unselfishly sit away from the limelight of the world and meditate for hours or perhaps even days at a time? Who is holding back this enlightenment with judgments, assumptions, and conclusions? We all are, myself included. The degree to which one becomes more awakened or enlightened will depend upon the perspective of the individual who is making that judgment. There will be those souls who feel that certain others are the right ones and certain others are the wrong ones, because individuals will either conform or not conform to the reality that exists for the soul making the judgment. It also depends upon the soul or souls that are being judged. Is that soul or group of souls doing their service to humanity and the planet with the highest integrity and without attachment to ego, status, or material wealth? Is it for the highest good of all? Another quote from an unknown source: "Spirituality must be lived, not just studied. All the books in the world will not help us if we do not live what we learn." Unquote. For those who do not resonate with the term spirituality, this word could be replaced with the new earth, or more simply, the kind of world that one is claiming to want to experience. The Buddha is credited with saying the following, and this also is one of the most important things I share with my listeners about my newscast. Believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who has said it, not even if I have said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense. In other words, is whatever you are seeing, hearing, or reading resonating at the frequency in which you are choosing to see and experience the world in this moment of now? You can live your life surrounded by your debts, your fears, and all the things that are not working in your world while giving your money away to spiritual gurus to become wealthy and giving away your freedoms and rights to politicians, police officers, judges, lawyers, bankers, and others. Until one decides that one is ready to live the kind of world one is claiming to want, there is no amount of praying, reading, or listening to others that will change his or her world immediately, unless maybe if there is a divine miracle, and yes, these have been known to happen. How important are you? Each soul is a way shower, creating a trail that is as uniquely different as it is equally beautiful. As Eckhart Tolle has been credited with saying, you are here to enable the divine purpose of the universe to unfold. That is how important you are. Your truth and purpose in the world may not be to meditate silently on a mountaintop or to sing and pray in a church somewhere or serve in a community group to help others. And you may never become rich or famous with a message for humanity. Regardless, your purpose or role, whatever it is, as long as you serve it with the greatest love, passion, compassion, and humility to the best of your ability in each moment of now, it becomes a service that is as great as any other. Whatever it is that others are guided to say, think, speak, do, and be, it is helping in their own way for the divine purpose to unfold for all, without question, expectations, or judgments. The wealthy spiritual gurus are teaching us as much about ourselves as the silent Buddhist monks, and as much as the quiet and humble servers within communities around the world. As we break down the illusions of our 3D world and release the fears of our enslavement to systems of debt, fear, and separation, we can begin to understand why certain souls have had to serve in certain positions or capacities, and this was to bring greater awareness to all around, so that people could begin to make choices that are more in alignment with humanity's goal and our planetary goal, and not just a goal of one soul. Do the wealthy spiritual celebrities live their truth to the world? Are others living their spiritual truths for the highest good? Is it my place to judge that? At this time, I do not believe it is my place to judge that, especially considering that I am myself struggling to continue my service to humanity, our planet, and our galactic families, while also awakening to all that I am and all that I will become. I can only do my best in each moment, and therefore I have no right to judge, even though I sometimes do judge others for their service and their purpose. Your best, so also can you do. Create a wonderful week until our next Moment of Now. So that is the unfolding consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is a part of the Enlight Radio group of programs. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary on the blog at cosmicvisionnews.com, on CVN's Facebook page and YouTube channel, as well as Twitter, Google+, Ello, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that, in the words of Yogi Bhajan, when you understand who and what you are, your radiance projects into the universal radiance, and everything around you becomes creative and full of opportunity. Or, loosely translated by John Lennon, the more real you get, the more unreal the world gets. Until our next Moment of Now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your heart, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosures unfolding all around you. Namaste.